the language on China goes much further than anything that NATO has said before. It certainly goes further than in 2019 when heads of state and government last met. And I think this does reflect an increasing realization that China is developing in ways that we hadn't hoped for and perhaps in some respects didn't expect a few years ago when the talk was of China becoming a responsible stakeholder in the international system.
But do you think that NATO and the NATO countries will actually be able to engage in any constructive dialogue with China following this kind of tough language from Stoltenberg?
Well, there is already some dialogue on matters of common concern. So I don't think it's absolutely out of the question. But you can't avoid saying how you see things merely in the hope that Beijing will then talk to you a bit more. And I think where there are areas of common interest, in the past, NATO and China have worked together on counter-piracy operations, for example, then I think it's still possible to talk about those sorts of issues. But equally, where NATO has concerns, whether that's about the theft of intellectual property or China's buildup of its nuclear arsenal and the fact that it really doesn't talk much about its doctrine for the use of nuclear weapons and so on. Those are matters where I think NATO has no alternative but to take counsel for its own security.
So how much of this is actually Joe Biden's agenda to bring up China on this sort of agenda of NATO?
Well, it's clearly a theme of his whole European trip. So he did get, I think, some things out of the G7 discussion of China, and he goes on tomorrow to an EU-US summit, and I'm sure that there also he will be discussing things like ensuring that it's the US and the EU that set future technological standards and not China, and looking at issues of China's trade practices and China's investment in strategic sectors of both the US and to an even greater extent the European economy, issues like that. So I think there's a consistent theme in Biden's European tour that he wants the Europeans to take the question of China much more seriously.